The NBA isn't the same league it was 40 years ago. In fact, it isn't the same league it was back in the early 2000s. So many aspects of the league and the sport have changed. We're talking tactics, on-court and off-court rules, dress codes, and even, I said it, NBA players' controversies. As the sport evolved, so did its controversies. Yeah, back then, controversies were majorly race wars or emotions running wild or just plain old drug use. But it's all totally different now, with each new controversy turning out to be even more ridiculous than the last. Finding that hard to believe? Then sit tight as we take you through the evolution of NBA players' controversies. Let's get right into it. Well, to really understand how NBA players' controversies shape the NBA into what it is now, how about we study the NBA controversies in eras, starting with the early 80s to the early 90s. Yeah, we're talking peak Magic Johnson era here. And you know what the peak Magic Johnson era brings. Peak Larry Bird? Boy, was Larry Bird a force of nature? The famous Johnson and Bird rivalry was probably the biggest controversy you'd get in the NBA at that time. We're talking about a rivalry that went as far back as their college days. Just in case you didn't know, both these men played in an NCAA title game before getting drafted. On that day, Magic Spartans beat Bird's Sycamores to start a rivalry that would span years. But this rivalry was bigger than just on-the-court victories and game-winning performances. It slowly became about race. The Celtics were the white fans' team. Yeah, blacks supported the team. But they would all eventually fall for the same racial divisions, silently rooting for only the black players on the squad. We had Bird and Johnson vying for championships, but at the end, all they were vehicles for a somewhat troubling racial narrative in what was supposed to be a black game. 10 out of the 14 players on the 1986 Celtic roster were white, pushing a narrative that maybe, just maybe, the team was purposely stocking on white players. Race definitely stood at the center of the Bird and Johnson rivalry, as Bird would often say during his playing career. I just wanted to prove that a white boy who couldn't run and couldn't jump could play this game, which he worked hard to prove. Probably even too hard. While this rivalry and race controversy certainly took center stage during the 80s and probably led right into the 90s, and no man represents 90s NBA player controversy quite like the worm, Dennis Rodman. Where do we start with Dennis Rodman? Well, as mentioned earlier, Mr. Rodman is literally one of the most controversial faces in the NBA when he wasn't making headlines for his exceptional rebounding abilities. He was making them as the face of just about the wildest controversies you could think of. Rodman had one of those childhoods, unhappy, shy, introverted, and all, which probably contributed to his controversial lifestyle. Rodman's first controversial moment came in 1987, when he made headlines for calling the great Larry Bird overrated all because he was white. Although fellow teammate Isaiah Thomas supported this claim, he still endured his fair share of harsh criticism. Later on, after climbing the NBA power rankings, he suffered a tough loss when coach Chuck Daly, whom he admired quite a lot, resigned in May 1992. And like that wasn't already enough despair, he also got divorced in the same year after just 82 days of happily ever after. And boy, that broke him. It broke him to the point that he even considered suicide in 1993. He eventually aborted his suicide attempts after getting talked out of it by Craig Sager. He then decided to completely reinvent himself, birthing this new bad boy persona we all know now. During that season, he headbutted John Stockton and Stacey King, and also refused to leave the hardwood once, even after he was ejected. During that same period, he also had this highly publicized affair with freaking Madonna, In the following 1994-95 season, Rodman clashed with the Spurs front office and was suspended for 3 whole games. Do you know that Dennis Rodman had a professional wrestling career? Yeah, in 1997, which we can agree was one of the peak years of professional wrestling. Mr. Rodman actually took up his hobby of professional wrestling, appearing for the first time on the March 10th edition of Monday Nitro, alongside his pal the legendary Hollywood Hulk Hogan in the WCW, one of his most notable wrestling matches, which had a somewhat controversial tone, maybe, was a tag team match he fought against Utah Jazz's Karl Malone after the 1997-98 season, where the Bulls and Rodman defeated the Utah Jazz and Karl Malone in the 1998 NBA Finals. Both Rodman and Malone squared off one mode time, this time in the ring rather than on the court. It was a tag team match, with Rodman fighting alongside Hulk Hogan and Malone tagged along with Diamond Dallas Page. Believe or not, but Rodman had a somewhat stellar professional wrestling career. In 1998, some woman named Dixie Johnson accused Mr. Rodman of sexual assault. Well, after reaching a settlement with Ms. Johnson a year after, 2 other women came out also accusing Rodman of sexual assault. He did manage to reach out of court settlements with them, but for the entire time, Rodman made headlines everywhere. And just as a cherry on top of this extremely controversial cake, that is Rodman's NBA career, he was arrested 6 times between 1999 and 2002. Half of those arrests were related to alcohol addiction, while 2 were made for domestic violence. And the last one in 2002 was for obstructing the work of police officers. And that pretty much sums it all up for Rodman's jaw-dropping controversies while still in the NBA. But don't you be fooled, alright? Dennis Rodman, although retired, is still one controversy. It's only right we start with what's possibly the most expensive divorce in NBA history. Michael Jordan had a pretty crazy personal life, for sure. But his divorce from Juanita Van Oy in 2006 was one headline maker. Jordan's extramarital affairs were the real problem. After raising 3 children together, Michael and Juanita finalized their divorce, and MJ was ordered to pay $168 million as settlement. The Kardashians have had some pretty crazy divorces, but nothing tops Kris Humphries and Kim Kardashian's in 2011. Somehow they were able to break the Dennis Rodman's marriage record of 82 days. Yep, Kim K literally filed for divorce after just a month of marriage. Kim claimed that cold feet led to her making the hasty decision of marriage. Their marriage lasted just 72 days. Yeah, no NBA player is beating that anytime soon. There's also former LA Lakers superstar Lamar Odom and Khloe Kardashian's divorce in 2016, which is probably one of the most controversial of the last decade. Odom's drug addiction and infidelity were the #1 reason why Khloe sought a divorce. The couple first filed for divorce in 2013 before finalizing it all in 2016. An incident that Jamorant is probably gonna be a big fan of. No offense, but nothing quite showcases modern era NBA players' controversies like the whole Jamorant gun incident. The Memphis Grizzlies has been the face of a whole lot of modern-day off-court incidents that have repeatedly pulled him deep into a whirlwind of controversies. And unlike the previous times, when this is all done, Ya might not have a career at the NBA to return to. It all first started when he was caught flashing a gun during his Instagram live in a nightclub. The league didn't take this lightly at all, going on to suspend the 23-year-old for 8 games. Just when we all thought, yeah, Ya is done, the point guard yet again flashed a gun on Instagram live. The only difference this time is that it was his friend who was holding the phone. Besides this whole gun thing, Morant has taken center stage in quite a number of controversial incidents, actually, including beating a teenager, assaulting a security guard, and guess what? Yet another case of illegal firearm possession. Come on, yeah. Well, honestly, you wouldn't be wrong if you said the controversies got more stupid. A Mexican standoff in the locker room. Come on, what are the odds of that happening? The NBA has always been quite controversial. And you also wouldn't be wrong to assume that that's why it's become the league it is today. Remember, no publicity is bad publicity. So, what do you think? Any controversies you'd like to add? How do you see this Morant situation ending?